Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for being here. Today, we're going to dive into part two of Truth series. In today's episode, I'm sharing part two of the relationship breakup journey that I've been through over the past 4 months. And today is specifically about my healing and how I've been navigating my grief and the specific healing modalities that I've been using. And there have been three things in particular that have really helped me to work with my grief, work with my shadows, and really dive a lot deeper into my healing. And certainly why the relationship unfolded in the way that it did, and really taking responsibility for my healing. And it's been such a beautiful journey of healing. And although it's been extremely hard, and there have been moments where, I've just wanted the pain to kind of like go away. I've learned so much about myself and really wanting to share with, especially some of you that are going through a very similar journey, or even just your own journey of a breakup, and wanting to learn more about like, how do we work with our grief? How do we let go of somebody? And how do we move through that process? So hopefully for some of you, you might learn something that might feel really supportive for you. And if it does land, please reach out to me and let me know on Instagram. So I've been going through some ascensions, I like to call it, with my healing. And the thing about healing is like, it's not really like love and light and like butterflies and pretty. Like, it's often facing the shit. It's facing the shadows. It's facing the dark, unhealed parts of yourself that like you hate and you're ashamed of and you just fucking want to get away from. And learning how to be with them, learning how to coexist with them. Like, healing is not always about like getting rid of the aspects of yourself that you don't like. Healing is really about working with these parts of yourself and fucking owning them. Like, owning them. And it has been really hard to like own a lot of my shit. I've worked with some pretty incredible mentors over the past 4 months. And I think like the biggest courage anyone can face in their healing journey is actually being like, yeah, I'm not perfect. Yeah, I have some pretty dark aspects of myself that I'm ashamed of. And being like, you know what? I'm owning my shadows. And I'm okay with that, because I know when I embrace my shadows that it no longer has power over me. And I can now bring the light to my own inner shadow. And so since part one of True series that dropped last week, I feel like I've unlocked a lot of healing within myself. And I really want you to know like that there's so much power in sharing your healing. Like, if you've got a friend or someone that you trust that you can share your truth with, maybe even like if you want, like start your own podcast. Like, using your voice as a force of healing is so powerful. And I really feel that since sharing part one, that it's like unlocked this code of healing for me. And I know that that's been a pattern for a lot of my clients that then share their journey and their vulnerability, that it unlocks so much healing within ourselves. So I feel like a lot of what I share on today is really for me. A lot of what I'm sharing today has pretty much not really anything to do with anyone else or Ryan. It's really for my own healing. And you know, the universe is clever. The universe is testy AF. And sometimes she's going to test you on your healing journey to see if you stay on the path. She's like, oh, okay, you're committed to healing. Show me how much you want it. And if you're like, if you're not ready for what she has prepared, like, you might find that on your journey, you steer from the path of healing and it takes you a long time to work through certain things. And that's really normal. Like the timing of how you heal will unfold for you in really mysterious ways. And I really know that I was meant to go to Bali last year and go through all the healing for me to have the awarenesses that I'm having now. Like, I just know that that was supposed to happen. I have no regrets. I wouldn't wish it to be any different because I'm so grateful for what it's been teaching me on the other side. So the universe has been testy. Although I'm grateful for her and her lessons, even just in the past week, there have been 3 instances where the masculine wound has come back to re-trigger me. Oh, and triggers are such great teachers. You know, a few years ago, I used to get really triggered, as we all do. And instead of looking at my triggers as an opportunity to let go, I would resort to coping mechanisms. Like I'd reach for the vape, or I'd reach for a glass of wine at the end of the week. And these coping mechanisms help me to like numb and suppress my anxiety and my anger. And I've since learned that when we get triggered, that is actually like a really beautiful thing. Like I've learned to love my triggers because they help us to understand that there's an aspect of ourselves that's like trying to communicate to us. So like anger, for example, teaches us where our boundaries have been crossed, or maybe where our boundaries don't even exist. So my triggers over the past week have really revealed to me where I haven't been feeling my emotions and processing, in particular, my anger, boundaries. To be really open and honest and vulnerable in this space, I received a text message from Ryan the past week, and when I read it, this trigger came up of anger. And initially, all I wanted to do was distract myself, and I started to notice what my natural tendency was. And when I really sat with my anger, I realized that I wasn't actually angry at him, but I was angry at myself for all the times that I allowed myself to not share my truth to protect him. And a lot of the times where in the relationship that I hid my truth and I dimmed my own light. And like I'm now learning how fucking powerful like this light is within me. And I'm so okay with being disliked in the process if shining light on the truth triggers other people. Because I know that triggers are beautiful opportunities to look within us and go, where is this revealing within me an unhealed part of myself? It's not him that's making me feel this way. He just sent me a text and it revealed within myself an unprocessed emotion of anger. And when I looked at it, I was like, whoa, what I'm really mad is that I didn't have healthy boundaries myself. So I'm so okay with being judged by others for using my voice to talk about my experience on this platform. And if people judge you for sharing your truth, it says more about them than it does about you. I found that writing poetry has been incredibly supportive in my healing over the past couple of weeks. And I really feel like poetry is like language of the soul. That sounds a bit woo-woo, but poetry is like this way that we can express how we're feeling in like these really beautiful descriptive words. And poetry doesn't always have to rhyme as well. So like anyone can write poetry. It doesn't have to sound rhymey or doesn't have to sound like a cool song or a melody. It can just be an expression of what your soul is really wanting to say. And so I wrote a poem a few days ago about dealing with dark energetic forces that will try come for you when you are expressing your truth and shining your light. The darkness will try and dim your light. The darkness will try to manipulate you to stay quiet and silence your truth, especially if it damages the good and safe mask that it wishes people to see it as, disguised as light, but in fact shadow. The shadow of itself that it would hide from others, the shadow only you saw, only you experienced. You are the light that illuminates this shadow. You are the light that it will try and dim because it cannot face its own inner shadows and it cannot face its own inner darkness. And this is a reality when we start to put ourselves out there and express ourselves. So that not everyone's going to like it. And that's okay. I'm okay with that. You know, in like part one, I made such a conscious effort to protect Rai. If you go back and if you haven't listened to that episode, you know, the very first thing is I give a disclaimer saying that, you know, I've got compassion and I don't blame him. And all of that's still true. But if you're listening and you're like a friend of Ryan's and like this triggers you because you know a side of him that maybe hearing my episodes shines a different side or aspect, like I'm not trying to tell people that he's a bad person. I'm just simply sharing what it was like for me and the shadows that I had to face when we were in the relationship. And if in the demonstration of sharing my truth, you only see an opportunity to gossip rather than learn something, like that's your own journey and I'm not going to try and control that. So again, it's like, it's not about blame. This is about me sharing my truth because I spent so long hiding and minimizing. And so my healing now is actually about giving myself permission to feel seen, heard. I don't need anyone else to validate me. I don't really care who listens to this. I don't run ads. Like I don't even post marketing reels on my Instagram podcast anymore. And like, if only my best friends listen to this, I would just be okay with that. Because like, this isn't about me proving myself to anyone or taking sides or getting people to like be on my side. Like, I don't care about that. It's about me claiming my power back through sharing my truth with my voice. That's why it's called True Series. And like, in a way, this podcast is like long form poetry for me. My healing right now, as I overcome some shadow aspects of myself, particularly my people pleaser and my avoidant part, like both of those parts are like, shut up, don't say anything, run away. So to overcome these parts and to help them find safety in being opinionated and saying things that might trigger people means radical self-expression. The good girl in me used to get so freaking caught up trying to get people to like me. And I would just be nice to everyone. People that I didn't actually agree with their motives, people that whose values I actually wasn't aligned with. And it was actually a really unhealthy thing. Like, so this is where I've noticed my shadow, my people pleaser, was really unhealthy. Like being a people pleaser is not about being nice. It's actually a form of control. Because now I can trying to control how people see me, especially people that I didn't even like or whose values I didn't resonate with. So I was like, whoa, being a people pleaser is actually not just me convincing myself that it makes me a good person. No, it doesn't actually make me a good person. It's my heart that makes me a good person. My people pleaser does not come from my heart. It comes from my pain. And I really had to face that over the past couple of months, in particular, the last couple of weeks, as I've started to come onto this platform and share my truth. And my people pleaser have said, shh, don't rock the boat. And I'm here to say, I'm rocking the boat. When we start to look at true self-expression, it's not about just like sharing like love and light and happiness. Although I love those things, like I love those really soft parts of myself. Like my healing is actually about being able to express things that make me angry. We ought to have the right to be angry about things, like when our boundaries get crossed. And it also means being able to express our opinions, like no matter how controversial they might feel for someone else or for many people. And expressing our shadows and like the ugly parts of ourselves we don't want the world to see. Like it took a lot of courage for me to say that my people pleaser was like a big shadow and really a form of control. It's like a lot of the times we want to take our shadow parts and pretend that they're not very bad. They're okay. Maybe we laugh about it. Like, yeah, I'm a people pleaser. Haha. And it's like, no, that's like a form of deflection to really sitting with the reality of these parts. Like keep us stuck in unhealthy relationships that stop us from telling people how we truly feel about them. That make us please people that we don't even like. And so I know not everyone's going to like me. In fact, some people are going to hear these episodes and probably dislike me even more. And I'm okay with that. Because again, anyone that judges you for sharing your truth reveals a shadow within themselves. Anyone that hears you share how you truly feel and they judge you for it says more about them than it does about you. And so if there's like darkness around you that's trying to come for you and silence you and put you down and tell you you can't share your voice, maybe it's because you're being a force of light. And you should never, ever let anyone dim that because it makes them feel uncomfortable. If it makes them feel uncomfortable, they can move. They can leave. Fuck, that feels so good to say. Okay, so I want to talk about how I've been able to claim my light back, get my power back. And I've had so many incredible women reach out to me over the past week since I dropped part 1. And I just want to do a quick shout out to all of you, sending you all so much love. Like, thanks for being here and supporting me, supporting this faith, supporting this podcast. Like some of you have been on a really similar journey and have really resonated. And it's kind of blown me away how so many women have reached out to be like, wow, Nikki, like I went through the same thing with my ex. So I see you, and I really hope today's episode will help you as I dive deeper into what my healing journey has looked like and start to share with you some of the things I've done to move through grief and let my ex go. So one thing I really want to start by speaking into is the emotional withdrawals and essentially like the rehab that you need to go through for your nervous system when you go through a breakup. So when you get out of a relationship, especially if it felt toxic, you will crash. Like it's a guarantee that you will become quite dysregulated. And you'll start to notice that you feel really like shut down and maybe quite tired. When we are in an unstable and unhealthy relationship, what happens is we live in this constant state of what's called fight or flight and freeze. Maybe you've heard of that before. And essentially these are survival pathways in our nervous system. So when we don't feel safe, we either go into fight or flight, where we either fight, we run away, or we go into freeze, which essentially is a form of like completely shutting down where we don't have the capacity to fight something or run away. So when fight or flight are not available, we then actually go into a state of freeze. So what happens when we leave a relationship? The nervous system that's used to living in these extreme highs and these extreme lows starts to essentially get addicted to the emotional psychological response that's happening in the nervous system. And then when we leave the relationship and the external stimulus is gone, which means like when your ex is no longer there, and so there's not this like tiger you have to face, right? The tiger is just an analogy. What happens is the nervous system then goes, okay, oh my gosh, I can actually like crash now. I don't have to keep running away from the thing that I'm trying to protect myself from. But what happens is the nervous system's been so used to these highs and lows, and it gets addicted to that. And so essentially it's like we're going through rehabilitation from our own neurochemical drugs. And if you've been in a relationship before, even if you don't want it to be unhealthy or toxic, it honestly becomes like a drug for the nervous system because it becomes familiar. And I know that sounds insane because you're like, Nikki, why would I want that? Well, like generally, when we look at people who are addicted to heroin, like they know they should quit, but they can't stop because the high keeps them wanting to come back. And when they experience the lows, they desperately just want to experience the high again. And that's how people can get stuck in trauma bonds for years and sometimes decades, because it can be so hard to break that in the nervous system, because the neurochemical responses that are getting released as neurotransmitters in the brain become really addictive. And so this is where like narcissists love the drama, and that's why they will like keep finding ways to pull you back in. And so essentially when we leave our ex, the body goes into like literal withdrawals. And the reason we get so tired and like literally burnt out is because when you're in an unhealthy relationship, the body is constantly pumping out like adrenaline and cortisol. And unfortunately, those become addictions. And so even after you've broken up with your ex, you can still feel like you're in this constant state of fight or flight and freeze. And it's like really scary because like your ex is gone and yet you're still feeling like unsafe. You still feel like your nervous system is in survival. When I got back from Bali, as soon as we left Bali, I got Bali belly. And I was like, I laughed because I was like, of course. Didn't get it once, the whole, 4 or 5 months I was living in Bali. And then when I finally got back to Australia and I found an Airbnb to essentially live in because I was homeless, so I could find a new home or a new apartment, I then came down with this really, really awful flu, and I was bedridden for days. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, like I feel like I want to go to hospital. Maybe a bit dramatic, but it was not good. And I was speaking to one of my girlfriends, Simone, my best friend, and I said to her, I think that this sickness is my body purging like all the toxicity, like all the unhealthy energy that's just been stored in my body is now being like purged. And the sickness is, it's like coming out, like literally. My nose, crying. Like it was just that the toxic energy wanting to get out of my body. And my body was like, right, we are going to collapse for you because we need to heal. And so like I literally went into this complete state of shutdown, and I couldn't even leave bed for days while my nervous system was just trying to recalibrate in its own way. And once the flu got better, it was right back to living in survival. And I stayed there for the remainder of October, November, December. And I just couldn't like consistently feel good. Like I was completely withdrawn from my body. I was so exhausted and drained. Like it didn't matter how much I slept. Like I would wake up at 7 and it would get to like 11 and I would be so tired. I'd be like, what the hell? Like I need to build my business. Like this is not sustainable. I got bills to pay now, like big bills. My rent is like $800 a week. I got bills to pay. Like I can't just sleep all day. And it was so hard because I was like, fuck, I'm torn between like honoring that my nervous system wants to heal and also like moving on with my life. Like it's been 3 months now, Nikki. Like get your shit together. And I was like, Nikki, like you can't speak to yourself like that. Like your nervous system has been traumatized. And this can go on for months. Some people go through this for years. I've had women reach out to me and be like, I've been healing for years. And like, I have so much compassion for you if you're like, yeah, that's me. I still haven't healed. Like, I can't imagine how hard that is. I mean, I can imagine what it would be like to go through this for years. And like, I really hope that in the episode today, I might be able to give you some guidance on how to move through this. But like the most important thing is that you work with your nervous system. So when we look at the nervous system, there's this really cool theory called, write this down, it's called polyvagal theory. Polyvagal theory. And it was developed by Dr. Stephen Porges. And he created this thing called the polyvagal ladder. And essentially on the ladder, there's 3 ways we can find ourselves in our nervous system. And I've already named them today. So the 3 ways are, first of all, if we are not in survival, essentially we can think of that as regulated. We can think of it as being able to access calmness and connection. The second place on the ladder, so up from that, is fight or flight. So I mentioned that already. And when we're in this place here, this is where we feel adrenaline, anxious, a lot of anger is experienced in fight or flight, like fight response. And so this is where someone with an anxious attachment style might find themselves. And then the third place on the ladder, the stage up from that, is called freeze. And neurologically, when we go into freeze, this is where we experience what's called immobilization, which means essentially we don't have the ability to move. Like literally, we might be like stuck where someone's like freeze and we're like, and we like can't move, right? Immobilization is like we're frozen and we're not able to move. We're not able to be mobile. And so if you're an avoidant attachment style, like this is where we can often spend a lot of our survival pathways in, where we can't fight, we can't run away. And being with those survival responses is so unsafe that we find ourselves in the freeze response. And this is where I often experience like majority of my relationship while, like particularly when it got bad in Bali. Not so much before we moved to Bali, but certainly in Bali, it was like where a lot of freeze, a lot of dissociation started to arise. And the most, like the hardest thing I've had to come to terms with is like, I've studied polyvagal for years. Like I teach my clients polyvagal theory. I started learning nervous system work like about 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago. I've known this work for years. And yet experiencing it in the relationship, I didn't see what was going on. Because when we work with our healing, or even if we're in a relationship where I'm like, Nikki, why didn't I notice the signs? Nikki, how come it's only after I break up where I'm like, wow, I didn't see the red flags? Because when you're in the relationship, you're not in your conscious awareness. If it's an unsafe environment, if you're feeling unsafe, you're in your reptilian brain, which is the part of your brain that will switch your conscious awareness brain offline. So it doesn't matter if you're like a neuroscience nerd. It's not enough to know it, but the actual experience of it is different. And so that really blindsided me. I was like, whoa, I thought I knew a lot about neuroscience, but the experiential side of it is different than just the theory of knowing it. And it was like really hard because in the relationship, like Ryan would say to me, like, you have it so much better. Like avoidant attachment styles are so much better than anxious. Like you can just shut off your emotions and like ignore them. And like, it's so easy for you. You don't really care. And I was like, maybe he's right. Like maybe there's something wrong with me. Like, why can't I feel my emotions? Maybe he's right. Maybe I need to like care more. And what I've since learned is that's not true. It was that I didn't have the safety within my body to access those emotions. And I wasn't feeling safe to open to him. So like kind of think of like a turtle that retreats into its shell and uses that hard exterior as a form of protection. It's not that the person doesn't care and is cold and heartless at all. It's actually that the emotions are too much that the system then goes into dissociating from the pain. So if you are an avoidant attachment style, like if that's your attachment style, I just want to reassure you that like, no, it's actually not easier. It's in fact much more difficult because you can't access your emotions. And in order for you to access the ventral vagal, which is AKA connection, in order for you to access safety, connection, you have to go from freeze through fight or flight. You can't bypass fight or flight because that's where you start to feel your emotions. And so I've been learning from this really incredible mentor. Her name's Bella Devine, and she's actually studied under Dr. Stephen Porges and under Bessel van der Kolk, who is the author of The Body Keeps the Score, which is a very famous trauma healing book. And she's been teaching me that, in fact, when you're in a state of freeze, we have to do what's called thaw. We have to thaw out our nervous system. And so think of it like taking a steak out of the freezer. In order for you to eat the steak, you kind of have to put it on the counter first. And that frozen steak literally needs to sit and slowly thaw before you can access and use it. And so our nervous systems are exactly the same, where if you're in a state of freeze and you want to start feeling and healing and getting into connection and safety, you need to access fight or flight and thaw out the frozen response and dissociation. And so it often feels like it gets much more worse because you're like, fuck, now I got to feel everything. The pain, the sadness, the grief, the trauma, the distraughtness. It's like, yeah, you got to feel it all now. So if you're like in a part of your healing where you're like, I just can't cry, I don't cry. In order for you to start experiencing connection and healing, you need to experience your fight or flight. To start crying, that is your thawing process to then access safety and connection within your body. And so, like, please don't gaslight yourself into thinking that your emotions, like, that it just like doesn't matter or you don't care. And if your partner, like if you've got a partner or an ex that maybe is the avoidant, like please have compassion for them, because it doesn't mean they don't care. It doesn't mean they don't feel anything and that they're cold and have no emotions. just because they didn't show their emotions or they had a hard time being vulnerable doesn't mean that they didn't have the capacity for it. So healing my nervous system has been months of work, and like I only just feel like I'm slowly coming out of my freeze state. And there's been a lot of crying, like lots of crying to access all my other emotions like anger and sadness and anxiety and rage, which now that I've moved through like the thawing, I'm now on this journey of being able to feel again and really unburden myself from living in the avoidant. And so it was so wild, because guess what? Like I went back to Adelaide in December and I saw my godmother, who is a naturopath. I feel like a naturopath is such a plain Jane word to describe who she is. She's so incredible. I love her so much. She's like this incredible healer. And she was like, I want to do this like test on you with this machine that I imported from Russia. And I was like, whoa, okay. So I booked in a session with her, and she has this machine which is called bioresonance. And bioresonance machines are used to scan all your internal organs. They scan your nervous system, your thyroids, your cells, your immune system, your bones, like pretty much all the tissues in your body. And what they do is they scan your body for imbalanced frequencies and essentially then use this machine to determine where there's a disruption or a state of dis-ease within your body. It's really cool. So she told me all the science, and even for someone who loves nerd science, I was like, whoa, this is pretty like complex. So anyways, essentially she did this scan, and I spent the morning with her, and we went through every single part of my body. And she was like, I'm just going to do a full body top to head scan, because I don't really know if there's a specific area that we should work with. And so she works with like cancer patients and helps them to essentially like heal. And anyways, so she got the test result and she's like, I'm just going to run through these specific like 3-4 areas a few times. Like I want to just make sure that the results are 100% accurate, and just go through them again and again and recalibrate is what she calls it, recalibrate the results. So she did that and she was like, okay, so it was what I thought it was, but this is not good. And essentially my test results showed that my autonomic nervous system, which essentially your ANS controls the natural process of bringing your body into homeostasis, like your healing, your breathing, your immune system, like everything. So that wasn't working properly. My thyroids, which is like so the thyroids like control stress responses, and they were completely like dysregulated, so they weren't working properly. My immune system was really bad. My lungs had all of these viruses within them. And I, at that stage, had this really gross cough. And she was like, how long have you had this for? And I was like, well, when did I get back from Bali? That was a few months ago. She's like, months? I was like, yeah, I've had this for a few months. And she was like, yeah, like look at your lungs. Look at what the results showed. It's because your immune system's not working properly. It's not clearing out these viruses. And then some of my other nervous system functions weren't working either. And so essentially my test results showed that I'd been under this like immense amounts of stress. She was like, Nikki, what have you been doing? And I was like, surviving. Like surviving, Auntie Katie. And she was like really alarmed. So she put me on all of these protocols to start getting my nervous system, my immune system, my thyroids, my sleep, like all of these things to start coming back into balance. And I don't really like using medication, but at that stage when I saw the results, I was like, fuck, I didn't think it was that bad. And I was like minimizing what I really thought was going on. And so I was like, no wonder I got so sick when I got back from Bali. And so it's been a really long journey of like literally coming out of survival and healing my nervous system again and getting my body to work. It's not just about you moving on and like being happy and like getting over it and like quit being so dramatic. It's like, no, your nervous system is in survival. Like you cannot just mindset your way through a dysregulated nervous system. It's impossible. You're in survival. You cannot just be like, oh, I'm fine. And so I've like really through this process realized the importance of working with our nervous system and doing body-based healing, bottom up healing. When I went to Bali, I did a 10-day silent retreat where you meditate for 10 days in silence. And I really learned during those 10 days what it was like to sit in suffering. And I really developed a stronger connection to my spiritual journey, like trusting my spirituality through my healing. And during the 10 days of silence, I actually experienced the death of a family member. So it was in one of my meditations, and I went through what it was like to see, it was actually my mom who died. And it was so scary because like my mom's still alive, like today. And so like seeing her like die in front of me was like really, really scary because I had to like live through that while it wasn't actually real in my like reality. And I went through what it was like to suffer the grieving of losing someone you love with your whole fucking heart. Like I love my mom so much. And I know sometimes I'm quite open about my upbringing and how there were moments where I didn't get the parenting I needed from my mom. But through my healing, I've actually loved my mom more than I ever have. Like I love my mom so freaking much. Like she's such an incredibly strong woman, no matter, the ways that she was in her past or the mom I wish I had. Like I love her so much more because of that, because I think of the mom she didn't get, that maybe didn't love her in the really loving, nurturing ways she needed. So like having all this love and compassion for my mom and then seeing her die, I was like, whoa, like this is really sad. And in the meditation retreat, your job is just to observe your emotions. And I couldn't stop crying. And this student teacher came up and she was like, Nikki, don't make your emotions worse. Just observe. Just observe. Don't cling to your emotion. And I was like, are you kidding? Like I was thinking, are you fucking kidding me? Like, you have no idea what I'm going through right now. And it was so hard to shake this feeling. I was like, oh my God, but that felt so real. Like everything I'm feeling right now feels so real. And I just kept saying to myself, observe your emotions as they are, not as you would like them to be. Observe your emotions as they are, Nikki, not as you wish them to be. And that all the pain that we experience is impermanent. The pain we experience is not going to be there forever. Nothing lasts forever. And this feeling will pass. No matter how much this hurts, no matter how much grief is present, this too shall pass. Through all of my grieving, I just kept remembering this passage and what it was like to sit through 10 days of suffering. Like, oh my gosh, I was counting down those hours every day. And so going through that suffering was like this really beautiful lesson for me last year, to know that all the trauma healing that I've been doing over the past few months will pass. Like, it will all pass. I'm still going through it, and I know that it will pass. This too shall pass. This too shall pass. But you know the thing about that saying, this too shall pass, it actually also means that love, happiness, and joy is a feeling that eventually passes too. And when I learned that, I was like, fuck, like those feelings pass too. And it's like, yeah, because life ebbs and flows, emotions come and go. And without the highs, we wouldn't be able to appreciate that when we're low, how beautiful it is to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so it's the light and the darkness that actually complement each other. Like, we don't get sad when the sun goes away. Like, oh no, don't go away, sun. We're like, no, the sun goes away and I enjoy the sunset. And when the sun goes away and the warmth goes away, I know that the moon has a purpose. And the moon brings darkness that's meant to be here for a reason. And I eventually know that the moon will also set, and it will create room for the sun to rise, right? So there is light and darkness in everything, and light and darkness have to coexist together. You can't have light without dark, and vice versa. And so the teaching of the Buddha is actually about not clinging to and craving any emotion, pain or happiness, love or depression. And so, like, letting go is not about, oh, when I let go of my pain, I do that so I can experience love. It's like, no, detachment is letting go of all of our emotions and just allowing them to exist as they are, not as we want them to be, so that they stop having control over us. Now, that's kind of like high level Buddhism teaching there. So if that didn't quite land for you, that's okay. Like, I've been studying Buddhism for quite a few years, and obviously went through quite an extensive 10 days of learning. But essentially all you need to know is, like, we feel all of our emotions for a reason. It's like, we don't look at the colors of the rainbow and be like, oh, like red is a shit color and green is so much better. It's like, no, all colors just are different. There's no better color than another. We might have our favorites, like green. My favorite color is green. But it doesn't mean that green is better than yellow. It just means we have our favorites. And it's the exact same with emotions. Like, we much prefer to feel love and happiness, sure, but it doesn't mean that they're better than sadness. The reason why we don't like to feel sadness and pain is because no one's taught us how to actually experience them and be with them. When we grow up, we say, don't cry, don't cry. When we grow up, we're taught, don't be upset, it's okay. And so we've never actually been given permission to experience these emotions. And so when we do feel them, it's really scary and it's dysregulating and it's like frightening, because we're like, I don't know how to cope with my anger. I don't know how to cope with my grief. I don't know how to move through my depression. So I'm going to eat my feelings away. I'm going to scroll my feelings away. I'm going to numb and suppress with alcohol and drugs. So, like, be compassionate if you're feeling that your healing journey feels fucking hard. Give yourself compassion if you're like, you know, this feels really scary. Like, I don't want to do it. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. Because, like, no one's maybe taught you how to deal with your emotions. And you've been taught to just be happy, be grateful for what you do have. People have it much worse. And so you've been, like, taught to invalidate your experiences and invalidate your sadness and depression and just make it go away and just choose to be happy. Just be grateful for what you do have. So from a spiritual perspective, like we need to move through all of our emotions to really start the journey of healing. And that's why when we work with the nervous system, like we can't bypass feeling all the stuff that might feel really dark to begin with. When we bring light to darkness, darkness ceases to exist. So think about how you can be a force of light in your own inner healing and start to be with your nervous system from a place of light. And that might mean calling or channeling your higher self or channeling a spirit guide, whatever, lands for you. So I really dove headfirst into my healing because of what I learned in Vipassana, my silent retreat. Everything's impermanent, even grief, even grief. So there've been 3 healing modalities that I've focused on in the past 4 months that I really want to share with anyone that's still listening that made it through that really, really heavy piece there with the spirituality and suffering. So if you're still here, I just want to honor you because I know that was a big piece to get through. So well done for getting through that. It's not easy learning about suffering, human suffering. So just want to honor you. So if you're on a journey of wanting to heal grief or fully let someone go, you might want to take some quick notes on your journal. So the first thing was emotional regulation. I just taught into the nervous system why it's so important to work with our emotions and to regulate our nervous system. You really can't talk yourself out of grieving. I'm fine, it's okay, just move on. Like that won't work because healing doesn't come from our cognitive brain. When we read the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, he talks so much as trauma is not experienced in the mind or the brain, it's experienced in the body. So we need to start using body-based regulation tools, not mindset-based regulation tools. So, is things like NLP and cognitive reframing and belief systems, is all of that really important? Yes, really, really important. But when we look at trauma specifically, we need to work with the body. And this can be really scary if you might have grown up in an environment where, for example, you weren't taught how to regulate your emotions. And this is why for some, grief is such a scary journey and we might push it aside. We might push aside grieving somebody that we've lost or somebody we've consciously let go of, because it can be really scary to deal with the grief when we don't know how. And the thing is when we work with grief, it's not just one emotion. Grief is not just one feeling. And there's 5 stages of grief. Number 1 is denial. So this looks like, pretending that it didn't really hurt. You might be like, you know what? I'm better off on my own anyways. You might say things like, I don't need a man. I don't need anyone. So that's the first stage, denial. The second one is anger. So I've noticed this shadow part that's come up since I've been going through my healing, and I call her my fuck you part. This is called True Series. I'm really bearing it, aren't I? And I've got so much compassion for this part of me because she just deals with pain in this way. And she's got a lot of anger, this part of me. And I don't think I really need to describe how she shows up. I think it's pretty evident. And she's a pretty angry part of me. And my people pleaser is often don't be angry. My people pleaser is but that's not who you are. You're compassion. You're love. Love, light, Nikki. Love and light. And so a lot of the time I've just suppressed this anger because I'm nope, I'm a good girl. Good girls don't show anger. No, good girls are, well behaved. So the second stage, anger. Third stage, bargaining. So bargaining is where we try and for example, we convince or invalidate by saying things like, maybe if I just give it one more shot, maybe this time will be different. you know what? Yeah, we'll get together in the future. We'll go do our healing now. I'll heal now. He'll do his healing. And maybe in like a few years, like maybe we'll find our way back to each other because our souls are connected. Yeah. Like maybe he's reaching out because he's changed. Like answer the message. Like maybe you should call him back because maybe this is him showing you his change. So the third stage is bargaining, where we bargain with ourselves, where we know we shouldn't go back. But there's like that part of like inner bargaining. Another form of bargaining is like, don't worry, it's in the past. It's okay, don't worry about it. It's in the past. Just move on. Don't worry about, what happened. So we like bargain with our own healing journey. The next one is depression, stage 4. So obviously, this shows up as sadness and pain and grief, and betrayal is one that comes through for me a lot when I'm in my stage of depression. Like I experience a lot of feeling of betrayal. And it's like this confusing feeling of like, how could someone that I loved with my whole fucking heart could have inflicted so much pain on me and not realize what he was doing? How could he have done that? Like someone I loved, how could I have trusted him so much? So like the depression phase for me is like a lot of betrayal and confusion. And then the final phase 5, is acceptance, whereas like realizing that it's okay to let go and move on, move forwards. But guess what? The sticky thing about grief is you can oscillate from any stage to stage. These phases, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're not linear. You don't go through grief and go, okay, I'm now in phase 1, which means the next phase is phase 2. And that means the next phase is phase 3. Like you can go from anger and like hating yourself and hating your past and hating that person to depression and betrayal and sadness, back to like denial, back to depression. And then you're like, oh, I feel like I'm moving through. I'm all good. Oh, I feel so free. And you're like in the acceptance phase, and then bam, back to depression. And you're like, oh my God, I thought I was moving through this, but I'm back in this place. And like, honestly, for me, it's been a lot of that. Like there's moments where I just oscillate. And the times in between where I'm from acceptance to depression and anger get longer and longer. So I'm noticing I'm spending more time in acceptance. But at the start of my grieving process, like majority of the time was in those first 4 phases: denial, anger, bargaining, depression. And like hardly ever accepting it. I was like, how could I possibly accept this pain? And now I obviously spend a lot more time in acceptance. And I'm learning that when my anger, my depression, even the denial and bargaining comes up, instead of being like, fuck, I'm here again, I'm like, okay, what am I in this phase to learn? What is this phase coming up for me to learn more about? And so there's even much more acceptance about being in these other stages of grief. So know that like one of the most courageous things, the most tremendously powerful things someone can do in their healing is when your emotions arise through any stage of your grief. The most courageous thing is to not run from it. Don't make it go away. Don't try and make yourself feel better. Don't try and numb it. Don't try and therapy it away. Don't try and intellectualize it and figure it out. Why is this here? Like the most courageous thing you can do is just like be with it. Just sit with the emotion and say, you belong. You belong. And I remember the first time I told myself that would have been like 2 months ago. And I said it to my pain, to my depression. I was like, you belong. And I've never said that to my depression before. I've spent like my whole life trying to make my depression go away. And I like learned this from someone else. who I follow on Instagram. And he was like, just sit with the feeling and say to it, like, you belong. And every time I said it, the feeling got worse. And I just kept saying, you belong, you belong. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to make you wrong. Like, you deserve to be here. And that has been the only way I've been able to accept that when I'm in a phase of depression, that like, it's okay. I'll get through this because I'm not making it like the enemy. I'm not making my own feelings, my own body. I'm not making myself the enemy. And so this feeling that I used to make the enemy and the villain and the bad guy, I'm like, you know what? It's okay. Because if that feeling was the enemy and the villain, who was the victim? Me. I was a victim to my own inner enemy. I'm the enemy and the victim. Oh my God. I'm the enemy and I'm the victim of my own fucking enemy. No wonder it's so hard to move through my own grief. And so when we stop being an enemy of these emotions and be like, hey, it's okay. Like, you belong. I'm not going to make you the bad guy anymore. It's okay. Come here. Let me just feel you. And that is so scary. Like, I didn't want to do it the first time. But like anything, the more we practice, the easier it becomes. It really does. Like, I promise you, it gets easier. And it's not that the emotion gets easier, it's that you get stronger. You get more equipped to work with these emotions. And so by doing this, this is where we start building these internal resources to deal and cope with our emotions. Because as I mentioned, I used to deal with my emotions by looking for things outside of me to numb and suppress, or I would lay in bed and scroll. And that was the avoidant in me. That was like, no, I'm too scared to feel. I don't want to feel. This is too scary. And I was like, yeah, it's okay to feel scared and do it anyways. It's just a feeling. Remember, it will pass. It won't be there forever. And now, like, I'm able to obviously use things like my internal resources of meditation and poetry and ceremonies and beach and journal. And like, I can use those things when I need them instead of numbing. Like, the thing is, it's easy. It's easy to meditate when we feel good. It's easy to go for a beach walk when we feel energized. But the real healing is being able to lean on things like that when like you don't even want to get out of bed. The real power is using these resources when like you just want to like eat or scroll. That's where the real healing is. And be patient with that. So one final tip I want to give you for that is create a container of safety. Like, don't just feel it randomly. Like, I would recommend saying, for example, if you live with anyone, like, let them know that like, hey, I'm going to just spend some time tonight doing a little like practice, and I just need some boundaries. So, you know, if you hear me crying or you hear me screaming or, you know, you hear me getting angry, like, just please know I'm okay. And I don't want you to come in and like disrupt me, and like, just know it's okay for me to move through all of these emotions. And like, maybe if you live with your parents, like, just say that to them. Be like, I know this probably sounds really scary, but it's like really important for me to feel my emotions. And I don't need you to try and help me or make me feel better, but I'm just pre-warning you to not come in and check on me. So create a container of safety so you can do that. Make sure it's a quiet space. I really like to use Palo Santo and sage. They're like things you burn, and they cleanse the energy of any bad energy. So I would recommend, if that's something you really want as a like spiritual supportive tool, I honestly feel like it makes me feel so comforted when I can smell the Palo Santo and the sage. And it also helps me stay here in the present rather than going back into the trauma and sort of getting lost in my past. Maybe you like to put on some music. I really love holding and hugging a meditation cushion. I love having a journal handy so I can do any poetry or writing. And the last thing that's really important is prepare for stillness the next day. So what I realized is every time I give myself permission to cry, the next day I kind of feel worse. And that's only because the energy is purging from the body, like the dis-ease is getting released. And so it can kind of feel like it comes out as like this purge of heaviness, of symptoms. You might get flare-ups in some of your diagnosis. If you've got problems with your skin or your gut, like you will get flare-ups, and this is all natural. It's the dis-ease energy, right? So energy that's not ease. It's the dis-ease, it's the trauma that's moving out of your body. And so like prepare the next morning to have really puffy eyes. Every time I would wake up the next day, I was like, okay, this is not a content day. Like don't jump on your stories and pretend that everything's okay, because it's going to be heavy. Like allow yourself to just authentically be with your heaviness. Don't try and make yourself feel better. Be okay with the heaviness. Remember, it's just like a rainbow. No good or bad emotions. I did this ceremony, and this might be TMI. This might be too much information, but I feel like if I'm sharing my truth, I'm going to share it all. And I did this ceremony where I went through this emotional purging, letting go process. And then the next day I got diarrhea. I know, TMI. But I just want to share that because like what can happen, and some of my spiritual teachers have said this, that's like quite normal, where the body can start to purge emotions and it has to release it in some way. So you might notice it as like gut health issues or headaches or like bad skin. And these symptoms are a sign that we're purging and releasing the energetic dis-ease. So just remember, the healing is in the feeling, and these emotions have to be digested from the body. Otherwise, it becomes like emotional constipation, right? Just like your food. If you don't digest your food, you get constipated. And so emotional constipation is your dis-ease. And when you're getting rid of your constipation, it doesn't come out very nicely, does it? No. So expect these symptoms, but don't be like, oh, this is bad because every time I feel my emotions, I get flare-ups. Feel like, no, this is my body releasing and purging. And now I need to learn how to lean on my internal resources, create some stillness, self-care, self-love, to then work through the heaviness. Okay, so the next thing is parts work. The second modality that I've been using has been what's called parts work. And essentially parts work is this understanding that we have all these sub-personalities. I have my inner critic, I have my avoidant part, I have my people pleaser part, I've told you already about my anger part, I've told you about my fuck you part. And so all of these parts have like their own little emotions and personalities. Like obviously when my anger part comes out, I notice her as anger. And when my people pleaser part comes out, I notice her as anxiety. And when my inner critic part comes out, I notice her with like a lot of self-negativity. And I notice my higher self as like love, unconditional love. So it's like we have these different internal thoughts, these different parts of you. Some feel this way and others feel another way. And sometimes they can be really conflicting. And you're like, what's going on in my head? Like, what the hell? So if you've ever had that feeling, congratulations, you're not crazy. It's because what we have is all these different sub-personalities of us. And so when we look at our parts that are, for example, our avoidant parts, our angry parts, our depressive parts, we might think they're really bad parts of us. Like, as I mentioned, my people pleaser has really controlling tendencies. And I'm like, wow, you're pretty unhealthy. Like, that's not very good. But I only use that language to describe that I've realized my people pleaser is quite wounded. But when I started to do parts work, particularly with my people pleaser, I was like, whoa, she's really destructive, but actually she's trying to protect me. She's protecting me, for example, from people judging her. She's protecting myself from people, like abandoning me. She just wants people to like me. I'm like, whoa, like my people pleaser is actually just trying to protect me, but in her own little nuanced, complex way. And so even our most destructive parts actually just want to protect us. Write this down. Our most destructive parts have protective tendencies. Destructive parts have protective tendencies. So like you're wounded inner child, the good girl, the people pleaser, even my avoidant that was like, no, dim your light, hide your voice. Like she was actually just trying to protect me in a relationship where I felt unsafe. And I was like really angry at myself for dimming my light, but I had to realize it was like, but I did that because that part of me was trying to protect myself. And when I did this, what I realized was like, whoa, it's only when my avoidant feels unsafe that she comes out. So like, what does she need to feel safe now? What does she need in the next relationship so that this doesn't become a pattern where I repeat it in the next relationship? Relationships will inevitably have fights. Like it's very normal and quite healthy for a relationship to learn how to fight well. And so you can guarantee that your attachment style will come out. Even if the relationship is like perfect. Like everyone thought Raya and I had the perfect relationship. Like it was. In the beginning, it was fucking incredible at the start. I'd never, ever, ever experienced anything like that. And then our attachment styles started coming out. And so like it's inevitable that we have to eventually work with these wounded parts. And parts work allows us to realize that these aren't bad parts of us. They're actually just trying to protect us in their own little nuanced way. And so for me, like my avoidant part stopped me from healing and feeling and dealing because in her eyes, it was too scary. So it's like, wow, like she's so good at protecting me. Like, thank you. And I've like now learned to love this part of me. Like love her. And a long time ago, I like hated this part of me. Like I hated that I was avoidant. And now I'm like, whoa, thank you, little avoider. Thanks for helping me. And when she feels safe, she stops trying to control me. And so obviously then I can start feeling from these other parts that are really good at that. My mature parts, all the parts that have all this knowledge and wisdom and spiritual teachings. Like those are the ones that do all the loving. But I just need to love these wounded parts first so that they can get out of the way and they can rest, stop trying to control and protect. So hopefully this makes sense. I know I can't go super deep because we've only got the one episode here. But just reach out to me if all of this is like blowing your mind and you want to learn more. Let me know because I can always do another episode just on this, just on past work. So let me know if this lands and you want to learn more. But moving on. So yeah, since the last episode, I've worked so much with some of these wounded parts of me, particularly my people pleaser and my angry parts and my good girl parts. And as I mentioned at the start of the episode, they were really triggered this week when some stuff happened and I had to be like, right, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep yourself quiet to keep people happy because they don't like that you're sharing your voice? Or are you going to realize that this trigger is bringing out your protectors, and these protector parts of you need love now? They need reassurance. They need your loving, healing energy. there's this really beautiful realization of like gratitude of like, whoa, I wouldn't have been able to work with these parts of me if all this stuff didn't unfold with Rye like it did. So like I'm so grateful for him. And I honestly say that with like so much truth. I'm so grateful for him and like what we went through because of the healing that it's created capacity for. Like that was supposed to happen. Like we were supposed to go to Bali and the relationship do like a full 180. Like all of those things were meant to happen so I could become aware of these parts of me and finally give them the healing that they needed. Remember, I've been learning this stuff for years, literally like over 4 years, and I only really started to work with them on a deeper healing level by experiencing them. So I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful for like what I've gone through, and again, no regrets, wouldn't change anything. The third and final thing that I have been really leaning into with my healing is how to let someone go and like let them go over and over and over. When we are trying to sever relationships and we end the physical contact, like physical contact can sometimes be challenging because maybe you have shared items and maybe you used to live together. And so, like, number one, physical letting go is really important. And when you're breaking up, if you can set physical boundaries, it's really important. So when Ryan and I were in Bali and I broke up with him, I got a villa on my own. I went to Airbnb and the first thing I did was get a villa because I really needed the physical disconnection. Otherwise, I knew that it was going to just pull me back into the old pattern. But the thing is, like, when we break up with someone and we then have physical distance, that's not enough to let someone go. So then the next thing that happens is contact, right? Like, so when you're talking to them and texting or emailing or Instagram or phone calls. And so that's the next step. From there, you have to go to a no contact period. When Ryan and I broke up, like we tried to do this conscious uncoupling, and I thought that we could make it work because he, at the time, said to me that, you know, he was going to be there to like be essentially a friend. And I thought that was a good idea. And I was like, yeah, we'll do this like conscious uncoupling. But I realized that that wasn't actually possible. And we really needed to be okay with the no contact. And so it was actually Rye that initiated the no contact. And I realized I was like, yeah, I think like this is the best idea because we really need like separation. Like we're separated, we need separation. We can't keep talking to each other. We're not going to heal if we keep staying in each other's lives. Like we really need to accept that we're letting this relationship go. And that means letting go of that friendship as well, because like everything has a death and rebirth cycle. And if we're wanting to rebirth something within ourselves, like our healing, we also need to be okay with the death and rebirth cycle of a relationship, including a friendship, including a connection with that person. It's really important. And it doesn't mean you can't be friends with them in the future if that's what you really want, but it's important if you're struggling to let that person go, that you sever contact with them, even over the phone. But then that's not enough. The next thing is that there is a energetic, like emotional bond. And there's also going to be a spiritual bond with that person. Now, when people break up, the reason why they might have a really hard time letting them go, like for example, you have dreams about them still, you think about them a lot, you miss them, you daydream about them, you ruminate and think about what your future could have been. If you're noticing that you've broken up with your ex and you still have those signs and symptoms of not being able to let them go, it could be an indication that there's still an emotional and spiritual bond that your soul has with that person And it's the reason you're struggling to let them go, right? From your mind, your heart, your emotions. And so I realized that in my letting go process, I was like, oh my gosh, like I've already let him go. Why do I have to keep feeling like I'm letting him go? And I realized it was because my soul still had this soul contract and emotional bond with him. And so what can happen is, like, if we then are starting to feel our loneliness and fearing being on our own, like that loneliness might be what's causing you to want to run back to them because you haven't severed that emotional connection. And so I noticed that, like, there was this part of me that kept fantasizing about like, what if? And it was plaguing me because I knew that I didn't want that. There was that voice, I'd be like, maybe he's changed. And I really had to remember, like, why I broke up with him in the first place. And I was like, why am I finding it so hard to let him go? Like, I'm the one that broke up with him. And I realized it was that my soul still had that energetic bond and the emotional like the soul bond. And so I was like, well, I need to, like, cut these cords. And essentially that's what they are. They're like these energetic cords that bind you to this person, especially if you've shared bodily fluids. Like, my gosh, of course you're going to have an energetic bond with them. And so we actually need to cut those cords energetically. They're not physical cords, like energetic bonds. And so I did 2 ceremonies. And these 2 ceremonies were both really beautiful. In the last episode, you might have remembered me mentioning that I had an unopened letter Ryan gave me. And a month ago, I started to realize that, like, I had this huge avoidance around reading the letter, because when I moved into my current place, I opened the letter and I just saw one word. It was like heartbroken. And I was like, oh, I can't deal with this right now. Like, I'm living in survival. I don't even have a bed to sleep in. Like, not now. And I realized that I had forgotten to read it. And I was like, Nikki, that letter is still there. It's still lingering. When are you going to read it? I was like, okay. But I feel like I need to do a letting go process, because if I just read it at any stage, it's like, it's going to trigger me, and I'm not ready for that. I'm not ready for him to tell me how much he hates me. And so I decided to make a commitment to myself that I was going to gather the courage to read it and accept whatever he had to say from a place of love and let him go. So I went to the beach and I planned a burn ceremony. And on the morning that I woke up, it was raining. And I got in the car and I drove down and I was like, oh, it's raining. Like, maybe I'll do it another day. Like, maybe I'll do it tonight. I was like, no, Nikki, no, you made this commitment to yourself. Rain, hail, we'll make it work. And I was like, I'll put like a little cardboard box over it. Like, the rain will not stop me. And I went down to the beach and it was so divine. As soon as I sat down, the rain stopped. And I was like, well, that was perfect. And I was like, of course the universe is supporting me. And I put on some music and burned my Palo Santo and I made a cup of cacao. And I got into my heart and I did a meditation and I read these 3 pages one by one. And with each page, I stopped. I went into my heart and I just said, I hear you. Like, thank you. Thank you for sharing your voice. Thank you for sharing your truth. I release you. And I release you. And then I would read the next page and thank you. I release you. I release you. And I read the 3rd page. Thank you. I release you. I release you. And once I finished that, I burnt the letter and I burnt a few other things that he'd given back to me. And I got up and I started to just like dance and move my body. And I felt like I started to like have this conversation with this like what felt like the universe. This is like 3, 4 a.m. in the morning, right? So You just picture me in like the dark 4 a.m. with a little fire. I probably look like a crazy hippie lady, and I love it. And I kept like saying to the universe, like, I don't want to let him go, because if I let him go, then I have to let go of the deep love that I felt with him. And I was crying because I was like, I don't know if I can let him go. Like, because then he's gone forever. And what if I don't experience that kind of love in my life anymore? What if I never experience a kind of love like that again? And I realized something, that whether the universe downloaded within me or whether I just knew it intuitively within my heart, but I realized that the love that I experienced with Ryan was only possible because it already existed within me. And that he brought out the love that was already there. People don't actually have the ability to make us feel anything. They really don't. Because in this response to me doing my podcast, some people will get triggered and hate what I have to say, and some people will love what I have to say. I don't make people feel anything. They feel their own things in response to their own journey. And so Ryan didn't give me the love, but the love that was already within me came out and shone through. And in that moment of realization, I had this epiphany of like, oh my God. And as clear as day, this little voice came into my head and she said, my dear, can't you see that love will never leave you? Love won't leave you. The reason why you've been so scared to let go is because if you think you let go, that you let go of love. You're not scared to let him go. You're scared to let that love go. And she said, but love will never leave you because love is eternal. Love will not abandon you, no matter who comes and goes. And in that moment, I started laughing. And I said, love doesn't hurt, love heals. And so now you can picture me at the beach laughing to the sky, saying, love doesn't hurt, love heals. Then I really look like a crazy hippie. And what happened in that moment was like my heart opened to the love that I experienced in the relationship with Ryan, and I started to feel it within myself. And I realized like the eternal love that is always here within us and that we can experience moment to moment when we finally let go. When we finally let go. And so that's the real healing, is when you let go, you think that love will leave you. But in fact, that's where the real love begins. To finish today's podcast, the final ceremony that I did was with what's called a tarot deck. Now, the beautiful thing about a tarot deck is there is nothing that you need to do that makes it heal you, because the tarot deck guides you into your own healing. And tarot decks are just like these cards that you pull, and they all have their own symbolic meaning and message. I would highly recommend the tarot decks from Alana Fairchild. Alana Fairchild is the most incredible spiritual healer, and her decks are sensational. So I highly recommend hers. The Isis deck is beautiful and the artwork is just incredible, but all of them are so sensational. So go onto Amazon, or you can go to